The muzzle flash lit up the mountainside for exactly 0.003 seconds. In that brief moment, Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez saw something that would haunt him for the next 72 hours. A figure in woodland camouflage, prone behind what looked like a CheyTac M200, positioned on a ridge that intelligence had marked as clear. The shot that followed wasn't aimed at his convoy. It was a warning shot, deliberately wide. The .408 CheyTac round punching into the rocky outcropping 30 meters to their left with a sound like thunder. "Contact, contact," the radio crackled with panic from Bravo Team's position 2 clicks south. "We have eyes on multiple tangos, but, sir, that shot came from our 6. Someone's behind us." Vasquez pressed himself against the armored Humvee, his mind racing. The convoy had been moving through the Coringal Valley for 47 minutes, following a route that had been sanitized 3 times by different recon units. Every overwatch position had been cleared. Every potential sniper's nest had been checked and double-checked. Yet someone had just demonstrated they could put a round exactly where they wanted it from at least 2,800 meters away. The silence that followed was more unsettling than the gunfire. No follow-up shots. No movement on the ridgeline, just the thin mountain air carrying the acrid smell of cordite and the distant sound of rotors, a Black Hawk inbound, still 8 minutes out. "Overwatch, overwatch, this is actual," Vasquez keyed his radio, his voice steady despite the ice in his veins. "Need immediate eyes on grid 312-447-891. Single shooter, CheyTac platform, extreme range capability." The response came back in a voice that sounded almost bored. "Actual, overwatch. Grid 312-447-891 is showing clear. No heat signatures, no movement. Are you sure about the platform identification?" Vasquez looked down at the crater in the rock where the bullet had struck. The precision was unmistakable, not the work of some Taliban fighter with an old Dragunov. This was surgical, professional. The kind of shot that required not just skill, but intimate knowledge of ballistics, wind patterns, and atmospheric conditions at altitude. "I'm sure," he replied, but his voice carried a question he didn't want to ask. Who the hell was up there, and why had they chosen not to kill him when they clearly could have? The radio crackled again, this time from a different voice, younger female with a slight drawl that sounded like Georgia or Alabama. All stations, this is Angel 6. I have eyes on your 6 tangos moving up the South Ridge. They're about to light you up. Recommend immediate displacement to the northwest, bearing 320. Vasquez felt his blood run cold. Angel 6 wasn't on his mission roster. 3 hours earlier, Captain Alara Ghost Reeves had watched the convoy staging area through her Leopold Mark IV scope, her breathing synchronized with the mountain wind. The CheyTac M200 felt like an extension of her body after 8 months in these mountains. 8 months of missions that officially didn't exist, targets that were never supposed to be there, and a war that the brass pretended was winding down. Her spotter, Corporal Martinez, lay beside her with his own optics trained on the valley floor. "Convoys moving in 15, he whispered, his voice barely audible even at arm's length. "Count confirms 12 vehicles, mixed Humvees and MRAPs. Looks like a by-the-book movement." Ghost didn't respond immediately. She was watching something else, a glint of metal on the ridge opposite their position, roughly 3,000 meters away. Someone was watching the watchers, and they weren't supposed to be there. She'd been tracking Taliban movement in this sector for 6 weeks, building a pattern-of-life analysis that had revealed something troubling. Someone was feeding the enemy detailed information about American convoy routes. Not just general timing, but specific grid coordinates, vehicle counts, and even radio frequencies. 3 convoys had been hit in the past month, each one with precision that suggested inside knowledge. The brass had sent in Ghost to find the leak. What she'd found instead was something much more complex, a network of local informants being run by someone who understood American military procedures better than most Americans. The intelligence was too good, the timing too perfect, and the tactical decisions too sophisticated for typical Taliban operations. "Movement on the South Ridge," Martinez reported, his voice tight with tension. "6 individuals moving tactically. They've got positions pre-sighted on the convoy route." Ghost shifted her scope, picking up the targets immediately. They were good, disciplined spacing, proper concealment, coordinated movement. But they were also walking into what was about to become a kill zone, and the convoy rolling up the valley had no idea what was waiting for them. She had a choice: maintain her cover and continue the surveillance mission, or blow her position to save lives. The tactical manual was clear about priority of mission versus force protection, but the tactical manual had never accounted for Captain Alara Reeves. Her finger found the trigger as she centered the crosshairs on a rocky outcropping 30 meters from the lead Humvee. One shot to get their attention. One shot to change everything. The warning shot echoed off the canyon walls like the crack of judgment itself, and Ghost immediately began her displacement. She had maybe 90 seconds before every piece of surveillance technology in the valley started hunting for her muzzle signature. The CheyTac broke down in 47 seconds. Barrel, stock, trigger assembly sliding into the custom pack that had been her constant companion through 2 deployments and more classified operations than she was supposed to remember. Martinez was already moving, their predetermined extraction route memorized down to individual handholds on the rocky slope. They moved like shadows, every step planned to avoid the overhead drones that would be vectoring in on their last known position. Angel 6, this is Overwatch Actual. The radio transmission came through her earpiece as she bounded between cover positions. Identify yourself and your authorization for this area of operations. She keyed the radio while sliding down a 40-foot ravine, her boots finding purchase on loose shale that could announce her position to anyone with decent audio surveillance equipment. Overwatch Actual, Angel 6, Authorization Tango Victor 779er, conducting authorized surveillance operations. The pause that followed told her everything she needed to know. Tango Victor 779 was a classification so deep that most field commanders had never heard of it. It was the kind of authorization that came from places that didn't officially exist, for missions that never appeared in after-action reports. Angel 6, be advised we show no record of your operation in this sector. Ghost reached the bottom of the ravine and paused behind a boulder the size of a small building. Martinez appeared beside her like a ghost himself, his movements silent despite the 40 pounds of equipment he carried. They had 300 meters to the extraction point, across terrain that offered minimal concealment from aerial observation. Overwatch Actual, recommend you contact Bagram for verification. In the meantime, you've got 6 tangos on your South Ridge, approximately grid 314 449-876. They're in position to engage your convoy with RPGs and small arms fire. Suggest immediate counter-battery fire, danger close. She didn't wait for a response. The mission had just shifted from surveillance to active engagement, and every second she spent on the radio was a second the Taliban fighters had to execute their ambush. Ghost pulled out a device that looked like a modified laser designator, because that's exactly what it was, except this one painted targets with a frequency that turned them into beacons for every smart munition in the American arsenal. The 6 Taliban positions lit up on targeting screens across 3 different command centers, and Ghost was already moving again before the first Hellfire missile left its rail 12,000 feet above the valley floor. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez watched the South Ridge explode in a sequence of controlled detonations that looked like the wrath of an Old Testament god. 6 simultaneous strikes, each one precisely placed on positions his own intelligence had missed completely. The sound rolled across the valley in waves, echoing off canyon walls and leaving his ears ringing even through his protective headgear. Jesus Christ, someone whispered over the radio net. Who the hell called that in? Vasquez was wondering the same thing. The missile strikes had been surgical, no collateral damage, no excessive destruction, just 6 perfectly placed shots that eliminated an entire Taliban fire team without disturbing so much as a pebble outside the target zone. That kind of precision required real-time intelligence, advanced targeting systems, and authorization levels that went way above his pay grade. All stations, this is Angel 6. The female voice came back over the radio, calmer now but still carrying that distinctive southern accent. Threat eliminated. Recommend you continue movement to objective Rally Point Alpha. Be advised there may be additional hostiles in the area. Stay frosty. Vasquez keyed his radio, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years in uniform and 3 combat deployments. Angel 6, this is Convoy Actual. I need you to identify yourself and report to my position for debrief. That's not a request. The pause stretched long enough that he began to wonder if she was still monitoring the frequency. When her voice came back, it carried something he hadn't heard before, a note of dark humor mixed with something that sounded almost like respect. Convoy Actual, Angel 6. Negative on the face-to-face meeting. I've got other business in this neighborhood, and I don't think your security clearance goes high enough for the conversation you want to have. But I'll be keeping an eye on your movement for the next 10 clicks. Drive safe. The transmission cut off, leaving Vasquez staring at his radio handset like it had just insulted his mother. In 23 years of military service, nobody, and he meant nobody, had ever told him his security clearance wasn't high enough for anything. He held a top-secret sensitive compartmented information clearance with special access program annotations. There weren't many doors in the military intelligence world that his credentials couldn't open. His driver, a 19-year-old kid from Detroit named Kowalski, looked at him with the kind of expression that suggested he was trying very hard not to laugh. "Sir, should we continue the mission?" Vasquez looked up at the ridgeline where the mystery sniper had been positioned. No movement, no heat signatures, no trace that anyone had ever been there. Professional-grade fieldcraft, he had to admit. Whoever Angel 6 was, she knew her business. "Yeah, Kowalski, we continue the mission. But I want you to remember something. We just got saved by someone who's not supposed to exist, using capabilities that aren't supposed to be deployed in this theater. That's the kind of thing that either gets you a medal or gets you dead, depending on who's asking the questions afterward." The extraction point was a shallow cave system that Ghost had prepared 6 weeks earlier, complete with cached supplies, communication equipment, and multiple escape routes. Martinez established security while she unpacked the satellite communication gear that would connect her directly to Langley, bypassing the entire military chain of command. The encryption handshake took 47 seconds, an eternity in operational security terms, but necessary for the level of classification they were dealing with. When the connection stabilized, she found herself talking to a voice she recognized. Deputy Director Harrison, CIA Operations Directorate. "Angel 6 Mothership, we monitored your engagement, clean work." Ghost settled behind the radio, her eyes never leaving the entrance to the cave. Even in a secured location, operational security was a way of life. "Mothership Angel 6, we've got a problem. The information leak is worse than we thought. Someone fed the Taliban specific grid coordinates for that convoy down to the individual vehicle spacing. That's not local intelligence gathering. That's someone with access to American operational planning." The pause on the other end lasted long enough for Ghost to wonder if the satellite link had failed. When Harrison came back, his voice carried the weight of decisions being made in real time at the highest levels of government. "Angel 6, be advised that your mission parameters are being expanded. We need you to identify the source of the intelligence leak, but we also need you to do it without compromising ongoing operations in your sector. How long can you maintain your current position?" Ghost looked around the cave system that had become her home for the past 6 weeks. She had supplies for another month, ammunition for sustained operations, and the kind of solitude that allowed for the deep surveillance work that might crack this case. But she also had something else, a growing certainty that the intelligence leak was coming from someone who understood American military operations better than most Americans. Mothership, I can maintain position indefinitely, but I'm going to need access to personnel files for everyone with operational knowledge of convoy routes in this sector. And I mean everyone, from the planning staff at Bagram down to the local interpreters. That's a lot of files, Angel 6. You're talking about potentially hundreds of individuals. Ghost watched Martinez monitoring the cave entrance with the kind of focused attention that had kept them alive through 8 months of operations that officially didn't exist. She thought about the precision of the Taliban attack that had been planned for the convoy, the sophistication of the intelligence that had made it possible, and the uncomfortable realization that she might be hunting someone who wore the same uniform she did. Mothership, I've got time. What I don't have is the luxury of being wrong about this. Someone with inside knowledge is getting American soldiers killed. I'm going to find them and I'm going to stop them. Send me the files. The personnel files arrived encrypted on a data burst transmission that took 3 hours to download and another 2 hours to decrypt. Ghost spread the contents across a ruggedized tablet computer, building link analysis charts that looked like spider webs of connection and influence. 237 individuals had some level of access to convoy routing information. Of those, 43 had the kind of detailed knowledge that could have enabled the Taliban attacks. Of those 43, 6 had recent financial irregularities that might indicate foreign payments. And of those 6, 1 had a pattern of leave time that correlated perfectly with the timing of Taliban attacks. Captain Derek Morrison, Signal Corps, attached to the 3rd Brigade Combat Team at Bagram Airfield. 32 years old, 2 combat deployments, married with a daughter back in Colorado. On the surface, he looked like every other career Army officer trying to balance service with family obligations. But his financial records told a different story. Morrison had made 3 cash deposits in the past 4 months, each one for amounts that exceeded his monthly base pay. The deposits had been made to an account in Dubai, a common method for moving money in the region, but unusual for a Signal Corps officer whose job kept him on a secure military installation. More telling was his duty schedule. Morrison worked in the Communications Operations Center, where he had access to convoy movement orders 24 to 48 hours before they were transmitted to field units. His shift schedule showed him working late on the nights before each of the 3 Taliban attacks, and his badge access records showed him in the secure communications facility well outside his normal duty hours. Ghost studied the man's photograph, a generic military headshot that could have belonged to any of 10,000 soldiers in theater. Brown hair, brown eyes, the kind of face that blended into crowds and never attracted attention. The perfect traitor, if that's what he was. But the evidence was still circumstantial. Cash deposits could be explained by family emergencies or legal investments. Overtime work could be explained by operational requirements or personal dedication. Badge access outside normal hours could be explained by equipment maintenance or administrative catch-up. She needed something definitive, the kind of evidence that would stand up in a court-martial and eliminate any possibility of coincidence. Ghost looked at her tablet screen, studying the pattern of Morrison's activities, and realized there was only one way to get that evidence. She was going to have to get close enough to Morrison to catch him in the act of passing information to the enemy. And that meant leaving the mountains where she'd spent the past 8 months, leaving the tactical advantage of distance and concealment, and walking into the most heavily secured military installation in Afghanistan. Martinez looked up from his security position. "Problem, Captain." "Yeah," Ghost replied, still staring at Morrison's photograph. I think I'm about to do something really stupid. Bagram Airfield at 300 hours was a city that never slept, illuminated by floodlights that turned the night into artificial day. Ghost approached the perimeter through a route she'd memorized from satellite imagery, her appearance transformed by the kind of operational disguise that made her look like any other contractor moving between secured areas. She traded her sniper's fieldcraft for the anonymity of civilian clothes, khaki pants, hiking boots, and a contractor's polo shirt that identified her as working for a communications company that did regular maintenance on base infrastructure. The identification badge hanging from her neck would pass casual inspection, and the electronic signature would fool most card readers for at least 24 hours. Getting onto Bagram wasn't the hard part. Military installations were designed to keep people out, not to keep people in, and Ghost had spent 2 years working personal security details that gave her intimate knowledge of base access procedures. The hard part would be maintaining her cover while gathering the evidence needed to expose Morrison's activities. The Communications Operations Center was located in the heart of the base, surrounded by multiple security checkpoints, and monitored by cameras that recorded every person who entered or exited the facility. Morrison's shift started at 400 hours, which gave Ghost exactly 57 minutes to position herself where she could observe his activities without being detected. She found her observation post in a supply closet that had a direct sight line through a window into the Communications Operations Center. The closet was supposed to be locked, but Ghost had learned to bypass standard military locks during a classified training course that officially didn't exist. She settled in with a fiber optic camera that would let her monitor Morrison's workstation while remaining invisible to the security cameras. At 3:57 hours, Morrison arrived for his shift, carrying a coffee cup and a newspaper like any other soldier reporting for duty. Ghost watched him log into his computer terminal, run through his startup procedures, and begin processing the message traffic that flowed through military communication networks 24 hours a day. For 3 hours, Morrison did exactly what a Signal Corps officer was supposed to do: monitor communications, process routine administrative traffic, and maintain the equipment that kept American forces connected to their chain of command. He was professional, efficient, and appeared completely dedicated to his duties. At 6:47 hours, everything changed. Morrison received a message that made him glance around the operations center before opening it. Ghost couldn't see the contents of the message from her position, but she could see Morrison's reaction. He copied the message contents onto a thumb drive, deleted the original message from his terminal, and slipped the thumb drive into his pocket. Ghost had found her smoking gun. Following Morrison off base required the kind of surveillance skills that Ghost had learned in places she wasn't supposed to talk about. She maintained a loose tail, staying far enough back to avoid detection while keeping him in sight as he drove through the chaotic streets of Bagram Village. Morrison's destination was a tea house 3 kilometers from the base, the kind of place where Americans occasionally went to experience authentic Afghan culture, and where local entrepreneurs went to separate them from their money. But Morrison wasn't there for the cultural experience. He took a seat at a corner table where he could watch the entrance, ordered tea he didn't drink, and waited. At 13:47 hours, his contact arrived. An Afghan man in his 40s wearing the kind of Western business suit that marked him as someone with education and connections. The man sat down across from Morrison without ceremony, and Ghost watched them engage in the kind of conversation that looked casual but followed the tradecraft protocols for a clandestine meeting. Morrison slid something across the table, the thumb drive, Ghost realized, and his contact pocketed it without examination. No money changed hands, at least not visibly, but Ghost noted that Morrison's contact left behind a folded newspaper that Morrison picked up and carried with him when he departed 15 minutes later. Ghost followed Morrison back to base, but she'd already seen enough. The Signal Corps officer was passing classified information to an unknown Afghan contact, using procedures that suggested formal intelligence training. This wasn't a soldier selling information for money. This was a professional espionage operation. She needed to identify Morrison's contact, trace the intelligence network, and gather enough evidence to roll up the entire operation. But she also needed to do it without compromising the ongoing missions that depended on base security remaining intact. Ghost returned to her mountain observation post with more questions than answers. Morrison was clearly passing information to the enemy, but who was his Afghan contact? How long had this operation been running? And most importantly, how many American soldiers had died because of intelligence that Morrison had provided to Taliban forces? The personnel file on Morrison indicated that he'd been in theater for 8 months, exactly as long as Ghost had been tracking the intelligence leaks. Either that was an incredible coincidence, or Morrison had been recruited shortly after arriving in Afghanistan. The timing suggested that someone had identified Morrison as a potential asset and moved quickly to exploit his access to classified information. Martinez watched Ghost reviewing her surveillance notes with the kind of focused intensity that had made her one of the most effective intelligence operatives in the special operations community. "So what's the play, Captain?" Ghost looked up from her tablet, her mind already working through the tactical options. "We're going to let Morrison make his next pass to his contact, but this time, we're going to follow that contact all the way back to whoever's running this operation. And then we're going to have a serious conversation with them about the consequences of getting American soldiers killed." The next intelligence pass was scheduled for 72 hours later, based on the pattern Ghost had identified in Morrison's activities. She used the time to prepare equipment and gather additional surveillance assets, including a drone platform that could provide aerial overwatch without being detected by the base's air defense systems. Morrison followed his established routine. Late shift in the Communications Operations Center, message copied to thumb drive, drive to the tea house in Bagram Village. But this time, Ghost was ready with comprehensive surveillance coverage that would track both Morrison and his contact to their ultimate destinations. The Afghan contact appeared on schedule, wearing the same Western business suit and carrying the same professional demeanor that had marked him during the previous meeting. The intelligence pass proceeded exactly as before. Thumb drive transferred, newspaper left behind, both parties departing within minutes of each other. But this time, Ghost's aerial drone followed the Afghan contact as he left the tea house and drove through the maze of streets that comprised Bagram Village. The contact drove with the kind of surveillance awareness that suggested counterintelligence training, taking random turns, making sudden stops, using reflective surfaces to check for followers. His destination was a compound on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by high walls and monitored by security cameras that looked more sophisticated than anything the Taliban typically employed. Ghost watched through her drone feed as the contact disappeared into the compound, and she realized she was looking at a professional intelligence operation that was far more complex than a simple case of a soldier selling information for money. The compound was a safe house, probably run by Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence or another regional intelligence service. The Afghan contact was likely a professional intelligence officer, not a local Taliban coordinator, and Morrison was an unwitting asset in an espionage operation that probably extended far beyond the theft of convoy routing information. Ghost keyed her satellite radio, initiating contact with Deputy Director Harrison at Langley. "Mothership Angel 6, I've got significant intelligence on the security breach. This is bigger than we thought." The response came back immediately, suggesting that Harrison had been waiting for her report. "Angel 6, Mothership, go ahead with your assessment." "Mothership, we're not dealing with a Taliban intelligence network. This is a professional espionage operation, probably state-sponsored. Morrison is passing classified information to what appears to be a Pakistani intelligence safe house. Recommend immediate coordination with counterintelligence assets and preparation for a comprehensive takedown operation. The pause that followed told Ghost that her assessment was causing significant concern at the highest levels of the intelligence community. Pakistani intelligence involvement meant diplomatic implications, international complications, and the kind of political sensitivities that could shut down her operation without warning. Angel 6, maintain surveillance but do not, repeat, do not, take any direct action against the target compound. We're escalating this to the director level for policy guidance. Ghost looked at her drone feed, watching the compound where Pakistani intelligence officers were processing stolen American military secrets. Somewhere in that building were the details of future convoy routes, operational plans, and troop movements that would get American soldiers killed. And she was being told to watch and wait while the diplomatic machinery ground through its deliberative process. The waiting was the hardest part. Ghost maintained surveillance on both Morrison and the Pakistani safe house, while intelligence analysts at Langley tried to determine the full scope of the espionage operation. The days stretched into weeks, and Ghost watched Morrison continue to pass classified information to his Pakistani handlers, while American soldiers continued to die in attacks that were enabled by stolen intelligence. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Morrison himself. During his fifth intelligence pass, something went wrong. The Pakistani contact failed to appear at the tea house, leaving Morrison sitting alone with a thumb drive full of classified information and no way to complete the transfer. Ghost watched Morrison become increasingly agitated as the minutes passed. He kept checking his watch, scanning the entrance for his contact, and making subtle hand signals that suggested he was trying to communicate with surveillance assets that weren't responding. After 47 minutes, Morrison gave up and returned to base. But instead of destroying the thumb drive or securing the classified information, he made a phone call from his quarters, a call that Ghost intercepted using signals intelligence equipment that officially didn't exist. "This is your friend from Colorado," Morrison said in English, using what was obviously a prearranged code phrase. "The package couldn't be delivered today. Is there an alternative arrangement?" The response came in accented English that sounded Pakistani. "Go to the backup location tomorrow at the usual time. Someone will be there to receive the package." Morrison's phone call had just provided Ghost with everything she needed. Confirmation that Morrison was working for Pakistani intelligence, evidence of a backup communication protocol, and intelligence about an alternate meeting site that hadn't been compromised by surveillance. Ghost spent the next 18 hours preparing for what would either be the successful conclusion of her mission or the beginning of a diplomatic incident that could strain U.S.-Pakistani relations for years to come. She positioned surveillance assets around the backup meeting site, coordinated with counterintelligence teams at Bagram, and prepared contingency plans for every possible outcome. At 13:30 hours the following day, Morrison drove to the backup location, a carpet shop in downtown Bagram that looked like any other small business catering to American soldiers looking for souvenirs. Ghost watched him enter the shop, knowing that this would be the moment when 8 months of investigation either paid off or fell apart. The Pakistani intelligence officer who met Morrison in the carpet shop was different from his usual contact, older, more senior, and displaying the kind of operational security awareness that suggested he was running the entire network. Ghost recorded their meeting through fiber optic cameras, documented the transfer of classified information, and prepared to close the net on an espionage operation that had cost American lives. But as she watched the meeting conclude, Ghost realized that shutting down Morrison and his Pakistani handlers would only solve part of the problem. The intelligence leak had been plugged, but the damage had already been done. Months of operational planning had been compromised, and American soldiers would continue to face threats based on information that had already been passed to the enemy. The takedown operation began at 3:47 hours, coordinated simultaneously at Bagram Airfield and the Pakistani safe house in Bagram village. Ghost watched from her mountain observation post as counterintelligence teams arrested Morrison at his quarters, while special operations forces surrounded the Pakistani compound. Morrison's arrest was clean and professional. No resistance, no drama, just a Signal Corps officer being quietly removed from his duties and transported to a detention facility where he would face questioning by FBI counterintelligence specialists. The Pakistani safe house was a different story. The Pakistanis had been expecting some form of American response and had prepared accordingly. When Special Operations Forces breached the compound, they found sophisticated communication equipment, document shredding machines that were still warm, and evidence of a professional intelligence operation that had been hastily evacuated. 3 Pakistani intelligence officers were arrested, but Ghost knew they were probably low-level operatives who could provide limited information about the full scope of the espionage network. The senior officers who had been running Morrison as an asset had undoubtedly crossed back into Pakistan before the American response could reach them. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the strategic damage had already been done. 8 months of stolen intelligence meant that Pakistani intelligence, and by extension, the Taliban forces they supported, had detailed knowledge of American operational procedures, tactical capabilities, and strategic intentions. Ghost packed her equipment and prepared to leave the mountains that had been her home for the past 8 months. The mission was complete, but she felt none of the satisfaction that usually accompanied successful operations. Too many American soldiers had died while she was building her case against Morrison. Too much classified information had been compromised, while diplomatic and legal procedures ran their course. As she and Martinez began their extraction movement, Ghost received a final transmission from Deputy Director Harrison at Langley. Angel 6, Mothership. Outstanding work on the Morrison investigation. We're recommending you for recognition at the highest levels. Report to Langley for debrief and reassignment. Ghost keyed her radio for the last time from the Afghan mountains. Mothership Angel 6, mission complete, departing area of operations. She paused, looking back at the valley where she'd spent 8 months hunting a traitor while American soldiers died. Be advised, the damage assessment on this operation is going to be extensive. Morrison's intelligence compromise may have affected ongoing operations across the entire theater. The mountains of Afghanistan faded behind her as she moved toward the extraction point, but Ghost knew that the consequences of Morrison's espionage would be felt long after she returned to the United States. The intelligence war was never really over. It just moved to different battlefields with different players, but the same deadly stakes. 6 months later, Captain Alara Ghost Reeves stood in a conference room at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, briefing a room full of intelligence professionals on the lessons learned from Operation Angel 6. The PowerPoint slides behind her displayed surveillance photographs, intercept transcripts, and damage assessments that painted a comprehensive picture of Pakistani intelligence operations against American forces. Morrison's recruitment represents a textbook case of foreign intelligence targeting American military personnel, Ghost explained to the audience of case officers and analysts. The Pakistanis identified him as a potential asset during his first deployment, built a relationship over time, and gradually recruited him using a combination of financial incentives and ideological manipulation. The damage assessment had been as extensive as Ghost had predicted. Morrison's intelligence compromises had affected 47 separate military operations, resulted in the deaths of 12 American soldiers, and forced the restructuring of communication security procedures across the entire Afghan theater. But the Morrison case had also produced significant intelligence gains. The arrest of the Pakistani officers had provided insights into inter-services intelligence operations that led to the identification of other espionage networks operating against American interests. The diplomatic fallout had been managed through back-channel negotiations that resulted in increased Pakistani cooperation on other intelligence matters. Most importantly, the investigation had demonstrated the effectiveness of deep-cover intelligence operations in identifying and neutralizing security threats. Ghost's 8 months in the Afghan mountains had proven that sometimes the best way to hunt a traitor was to become invisible and wait for them to reveal themselves. Deputy Director Harrison approached Ghost after the briefing, carrying a folder that contained her next assignment. Outstanding work on Angel 6, Captain. The President himself has been briefed on your operation, and there's talk of a presidential unit citation for your role in stopping the intelligence leak. Ghost accepted the folder but didn't open it immediately. She'd learned that CIA assignments often came with complications that weren't apparent from the initial briefing documents. What's the next mission, sir? Harrison smiled with the kind of expression that suggested he was about to make her life very interesting. There's a situation developing in Eastern Europe that requires someone with your particular skills. Russian intelligence has been recruiting assets inside NATO military commands, and we need someone who can identify the security breach without alerting the Russians that we're onto them. Ghost opened the folder and scanned the preliminary intelligence assessment. Russian recruitment of NATO officers, classified information being passed to Moscow, American military secrets being compromised by allies who were supposed to be on the same side. It was Morrison all over again, but with higher stakes and more complex political implications. How long do I have to prepare? Ghost asked, already mentally cataloging the equipment and cover identity she would need for a deep cover operation in Europe. Your flight leaves tomorrow night. Welcome to the big leagues, Captain. Try not to start World War III while you're hunting traitors. Ghost closed the folder and smiled. 8 months in the Afghan mountains had taught her that the most dangerous enemies were often the ones who wore friendly uniforms and spoke familiar languages. But they'd also taught her that patience, precision, and the right shot at the right moment could change everything. The intelligence war was moving to a new battlefield, but Ghost Reeves was ready to follow wherever the mission led. The apartment in Prague's old town looked like any other safe house Ghost had operated from: anonymous furniture, blackout curtains, and communication equipment hidden behind false walls. But this assignment felt different from the Afghan mountains. Here, she was hunting traitors who spoke perfect English, carried NATO security clearances, and had sworn the same oath she had. The Russian recruitment operation had been running for 18 months, according to the intelligence briefing Ghost had received during her flight from Washington. 3 separate security breaches had been traced to NATO military headquarters in Brussels, each one involving classified information that found its way to Moscow within hours of being distributed to alliance partners. The pattern was sophisticated. Someone with access to NATO's secure communication systems was photographing classified documents and passing them to Russian intelligence through a network that remained completely invisible to traditional counterintelligence methods. No suspicious financial transactions, no unusual travel patterns, no communications intercepts that revealed the identity of the source. Ghost's cover identity was solid but simple. Major Sarah Mitchell, U.S. Army Signal Corps, assigned to NATO's Communications Security Division as part of a routine personnel rotation. The identity would give her access to the secure communication systems where the leaks were originating, while providing a legitimate reason for her to ask detailed questions about information security procedures. Her first day at NATO headquarters revealed the scope of the challenge she was facing. The Communications Security Division employed 47 military personnel from 12 different NATO countries, each with varying levels of security clearance and access to classified information. Any one of them could be the Russian asset, and traditional surveillance methods would be impossible in the heavily monitored environment of a NATO military installation. But Ghost had learned during her time in Afghanistan that the best surveillance was often invisible, the kind of observation that happened through data analysis rather than physical tracking. She began building a comprehensive profile of everyone with access to the compromised information, looking for patterns that might reveal the identity of the Russian asset. The work was painstaking and methodical. Ghost analyzed duty rosters, leave schedules, access logs, and communication records, building link analysis charts that mapped the flow of information through NATO's secure systems. She was looking for the digital fingerprints that every intelligence operation left behind, the subtle patterns that revealed human behavior even in highly secure environments. 3 weeks into the assignment, Ghost found her first lead, Colonel Andreas Weber, German Army, who served as Deputy Chief of Communications Security. Weber had been at NATO headquarters for 2 years, held the highest level of security clearances, and had access to virtually every piece of classified information that had been compromised. More significantly, Weber's duty schedule placed him in the Communications Security Division during the hours immediately before each security breach. He worked late shifts, had access to secure communication systems outside normal business hours, and possessed the technical knowledge necessary to defeat NATO's information security measures. Surveillance of Colonel Weber required the kind of operational subtlety that Ghost had perfected during her years in special operations. She couldn't follow him physically without risking exposure, so she relied on electronic surveillance methods that were technically legal under NATO security agreements, but practically invisible to the target. Weber's computer usage patterns revealed meticulous attention to information security, perhaps too meticulous for someone who wasn't trying to hide something. He cleared his browser cache after every session, used encrypted communication applications for routine administrative work, and maintained personal files on removable storage devices rather than on NATO's secure network. But Weber's personal life told a different story. Ghost's investigation revealed that he was facing significant financial pressure. His ex-wife was demanding increased alimony payments, his daughter required expensive medical treatment, and his military salary was insufficient to cover his obligations. The classic motivations for espionage: money, ideology, coercion, and ego. In Weber's case, money appeared to be the primary factor. Ghost's breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Weber's smartphone. NATO security regulations prohibited personal mobile devices in secure areas, but Weber routinely violated this policy, carrying his phone into the Communications Security Division and using it to photograph classified documents when he thought no one was watching. The phone's GPS data, which Ghost accessed through a classified surveillance program that officially didn't exist, revealed Weber's pattern of movement around Prague. Twice a week, he visited a small cafe in the Vinohrady district, where he spent exactly 37 minutes reading newspapers and drinking coffee. The timing was too regular to be coincidental, and the location was perfect for conducting clandestine meetings with foreign intelligence operatives. Ghost established surveillance on the cafe using the same techniques she'd employed in Afghanistan: invisible observation posts, electronic surveillance equipment, and patience. She watched Weber meet with a man who appeared to be a local businessman, but displayed the operational security awareness of a professional intelligence officer. The meetings followed classic espionage tradecraft: no direct contact, no obvious exchange of materials, but subtle signals that indicated information was being passed from Weber to his Russian handler. Ghost documented the meetings, recorded the conversations using directional microphones, and built a comprehensive case against Colonel Weber that would stand up in any NATO military tribunal. But as she prepared to close the net on Weber, Ghost received intelligence that complicated everything. Weber wasn't the only NATO officer who was working for Russian intelligence. The smartphone surveillance had revealed communications between Weber and two other NATO personnel, suggesting that the Russian operation was much larger than anyone had suspected. Major Elena Kozlova, Polish Army, assigned to NATO's intelligence division. Captain James MacLeod, British Army, working in strategic planning. Both had access to classified information, both displayed suspicious communication patterns, and both were in regular contact with Weber through encrypted messaging applications. Ghost realized she wasn't dealing with a single Russian asset. She was looking at a professional espionage network that had penetrated NATO at multiple levels. The scope of the intelligence compromise was potentially catastrophic, affecting everything from tactical military operations to strategic alliance planning. The decision to expand the investigation to include Kozlova and MacLeod required authorization from the highest levels of NATO leadership. Ghost found herself briefing a room full of generals and intelligence directors who were struggling to comprehend the scope of the Russian penetration of their organization. The evidence indicates a coordinated recruitment operation that has been running for at least 2 years, Ghost explained, using satellite imagery and communication intercepts to illustrate the extent of the Russian network. Weber appears to be the primary asset, but Kozlova and MacLeod are providing intelligence from their respective divisions that gives the Russians comprehensive insight into NATO's capabilities and intentions. General Patricia Morrison, NATO's Deputy Supreme Allied Commander, studied the intelligence assessments with the kind of focused attention that had made her one of the most respected military leaders in the alliance. Captain Reeves, what's your assessment of the damage these 3 officers have caused to NATO security? Ghost had been dreading this question, because the answer was going to be politically explosive. General, based on the classified information these officers had access to, I estimate that Russian intelligence has compromised virtually every major NATO operation planned for the next 18 months. Strategic deployment plans, weapons capabilities, intelligence sources, diplomatic negotiating positions, all of it has been passed to Moscow. The silence that followed told Ghost everything she needed to know about the political implications of her assessment. NATO's security had been fundamentally compromised, and the alliance would need to restructure its entire approach to information security to prevent future penetrations. But the immediate priority was stopping the 3 Russian assets before they could cause additional damage. Ghost proposed a coordinated takedown operation that would arrest Weber, Kozlova, and MacLeod simultaneously, while conducting searches of their quarters and seizing their communication equipment. The operation was approved with the understanding that it would need to be conducted with absolute secrecy to prevent diplomatic complications with Germany, Poland, and the United Kingdom. The arrest of military officers from NATO member countries on espionage charges would strain alliance relationships and provide propaganda opportunities for Russian intelligence services. Ghost spent the next 72 hours coordinating with NATO security services and planning the simultaneous arrests. The operation would require precise timing, comprehensive evidence collection, and damage control measures that would minimize the political fallout from exposing a major Russian intelligence operation. At 6:30 hours on a Tuesday morning, NATO security forces moved against all 3 targets simultaneously. Weber was arrested at his apartment in Prague, Kozlova was taken into custody at NATO headquarters in Brussels, and MacLeod was apprehended at his hotel in London, where he was attending a classified briefing on alliance strategic planning. The arrests yielded a treasure trove of intelligence: encrypted communication devices, photographed classified documents, financial records showing payments from Russian intelligence, and detailed instructions for conducting espionage operations against NATO targets. But the most significant discovery was a list of additional targets that Russian intelligence was attempting to recruit. The names on the list included senior military officers from every NATO member country, suggesting that the Weber network was just the beginning of a much larger Russian intelligence operation against the alliance. The interrogations of Weber, Kozlova, and MacLeod revealed the sophisticated nature of the Russian recruitment operation. Each officer had been approached using different techniques, but all three had been gradually compromised through a combination of financial incentives, personal relationships, and psychological manipulation. Weber had been recruited through financial pressure. Russian intelligence had arranged for his ex-wife to demand increased alimony payments, while simultaneously offering him a solution through consulting work that eventually evolved into espionage activities. The approach was subtle, deniable, and designed to make Weber feel like he was in control of his decisions. Kozlova's recruitment had been more complex, involving a romantic relationship with a man she believed to be a Polish businessman, but who was actually a Russian intelligence officer. The relationship had lasted 18 months, during which Kozlova had been gradually introduced to business associates, who expressed interest in NATO's intelligence assessments of Eastern European security threats. MacLeod's case was the most troubling, because it revealed that Russian intelligence had been targeting British military officers through professional conferences and academic seminars. MacLeod had been approached at a strategic studies conference in Vienna, where he'd been invited to participate in informal discussions about NATO strategy that had eventually evolved into a formal intelligence relationship. The pattern revealed Russian intelligence's sophisticated understanding of NATO personnel and their individual vulnerabilities. Each recruitment had been tailored to the specific psychological and financial needs of the target, using approaches that were designed to minimize suspicion while maximizing intelligence collection. Ghost's analysis of the interrogation transcripts identified the common elements of the Russian operation: long-term relationship building, gradual escalation of intelligence requirements, and the use of plausible cover stories that allowed the targets to rationalize their actions. It was textbook espionage tradecraft, executed with the kind of professional competence that suggested state-level resources and training. But the interrogations also revealed the existence of other Russian assets within NATO that hadn't been identified yet. Weber had mentioned colleagues who were providing similar services to Russian intelligence, while Kozlova had referenced a network of sources that extended beyond the three officers who had been arrested. Ghost found herself facing the same challenge she'd encountered in Afghanistan. Neutralizing one intelligence operation had revealed the existence of a larger network that posed an even greater threat to American and NATO security. The Russian penetration of NATO was more extensive than anyone had suspected, and Ghost's investigation had only identified the tip of the iceberg. NATO's leadership made the decision to expand the counterintelligence investigation, tasking Ghost with identifying and neutralizing the remaining Russian assets within the alliance. The assignment would require her to remain in Europe indefinitely, operating under deep cover while building cases against additional traitors who had sworn oaths to defend the same values she believed in. As Ghost prepared for the expanded mission, she reflected on the pattern that seemed to define her career. Every successful operation led to the discovery of larger threats that required more complex responses. The intelligence war never really ended. It just evolved to meet new challenges with new players and higher stakes. The expanded counterintelligence operation required Ghost to establish a new cover identity that would give her access to multiple NATO installations across Europe. She became Major Jennifer Hayes, U.S. Army Intelligence, assigned to a rotating inspection team that reviewed communications security procedures at Alliance facilities. The cover was perfect for her mission. It provided legitimate reasons for her to ask detailed questions about security procedures, access to classified information systems, and opportunities to observe the behavior of personnel who might be working for foreign intelligence services. More importantly, it allowed her to travel throughout Europe without attracting attention to her activities. Ghost's first target was the NATO facility in Norfolk, Virginia, where intelligence analysts processed information from across the alliance. The facility employed over 200 military and civilian personnel from 16 countries, making it an ideal target for Russian intelligence recruitment operations. Her investigation began with the same methodical approach she'd used in Prague, analyzing communication logs, duty schedules, and access patterns to identify personnel who might be passing information to foreign intelligence services. But the Norfolk facility presented unique challenges. The volume of classified information was enormous, the number of potential suspects was overwhelming, and the security environment was more sophisticated than anything she'd encountered before. 3 weeks into the Norfolk investigation, Ghost identified her primary suspect, Dr. Michael Chen, a civilian analyst with the U.S. Department of Defense who had been assigned to NATO's Intelligence Analysis Division for the past 14 months. Chen held top-secret sensitive compartmented information clearances, had access to intelligence from every NATO member country, and displayed behavior patterns that suggested possible foreign intelligence connections. Chen's financial records showed no irregularities, his travel patterns appeared routine, and his personal life seemed unremarkable. But Ghost had learned that the most dangerous intelligence operatives were often the ones who appeared completely normal on the surface, while conducting sophisticated espionage operations beneath the veneer of respectability. Her breakthrough came from analyzing Chen's computer usage patterns within NATO secure networks. Chen routinely accessed classified information that wasn't directly related to his assigned duties, downloaded documents to removable storage devices, and maintained personal files in directories that weren't monitored by standard security protocols. More significantly, Chen's network activity showed a pattern of downloading intelligence reports late in the evening, when fewer personnel were present to observe his activities. The timing suggested operational security awareness. He was deliberately choosing moments when his activities would attract minimal attention from colleagues and security personnel. Ghost established surveillance on Chen using the same electronic methods she'd employed against Weber in Prague. Chen's smartphone data revealed regular visits to a Chinese restaurant in downtown Norfolk, where he met with an individual who appeared to be conducting classic intelligence handling operations. The meetings followed established espionage protocols. Chen would arrive first, order food he didn't eat, and wait for his contact to arrive. The contact, an Asian man in his 50s who displayed professional surveillance awareness, would sit at a nearby table, conduct subtle signal exchanges with Chen, and depart after exactly 23 minutes. Ghost documented the meetings, recorded the conversations using directional surveillance equipment, and built a comprehensive case against Chen that revealed his connection to Chinese intelligence services. But as she prepared to close the operation, Ghost discovered that Chen was part of a larger network that included other NATO personnel who were working for the same foreign intelligence service. The Chinese intelligence operation within NATO was even more sophisticated than the Russian network Ghost had previously uncovered. Where the Russians had focused on recruiting individual assets through personal relationships and financial incentives, the Chinese had established a systematic penetration of NATO's intelligence systems that involved multiple operatives working in coordination. Dr. Chen was the primary intelligence collector, but he was supported by 3 other NATO personnel who provided specialized access to different categories of classified information. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Park, South Korean Army, worked in NATO's Strategic Planning Division and had access to long-term alliance military strategies. Captain François Dubois, French Navy, served in the Intelligence Fusion Center and could provide real-time tactical intelligence. Major Anna Virtanen, Finnish Army, was assigned to NATO's Cyber Defense Division and had access to information about Alliance cybersecurity capabilities. Each operative had been recruited using different approaches, but all four were being handled by the same Chinese intelligence officer, the man Ghost had observed meeting with Chen at the Norfolk restaurant. The coordination between the operatives suggested a level of professional management that indicated state-level intelligence resources and training. Ghost's investigation revealed that the Chinese operation had been running for over 2 years, during which time the operatives had provided Beijing with comprehensive intelligence about NATO's military capabilities, strategic intentions, and intelligence sources. The damage assessment was staggering. Virtually every aspect of NATO's operations had been compromised, from tactical military planning to diplomatic negotiations with non-alliance partners. But the Chinese network had been more careful about operational security than the Russian assets Ghost had previously investigated. Financial transactions were conducted through legitimate business relationships. Communications were encrypted using commercial applications that provided plausible deniability, and meetings were structured to appear like routine social interactions rather than intelligence operations. The sophistication of the Chinese operation required Ghost to develop new investigative techniques that could penetrate the network without alerting the operatives to her activities. She established comprehensive surveillance on all four targets, monitored their communications using classified interception capabilities, and built detailed profiles of their activities both within and outside NATO facilities. The investigation took 4 months to complete, during which Ghost documented hundreds of intelligence transfers, recorded dozens of clandestine meetings, and identified the complete structure of the Chinese intelligence network within NATO. The evidence was overwhelming, but the political implications were enormous. Exposing the network would reveal that Chinese intelligence had achieved unprecedented access to NATO's most sensitive information. Ghost's final briefing to NATO leadership painted a picture of intelligence compromise that threatened the fundamental security of the alliance. The Chinese operation represents the most sophisticated foreign intelligence penetration of NATO in the organization's history, she explained to a room full of generals and intelligence directors who were struggling to comprehend the scope of the compromise. Based on the intelligence these operatives had access to, I assess that Chinese intelligence has comprehensive knowledge of NATO's military capabilities, strategic planning, and intelligence operations. They know our strengths, our weaknesses, our intentions, and our sources. In intelligence terms, NATO has been completely compromised. The silence that followed her briefing told Ghost everything she needed to know about the political crisis her investigation had revealed. NATO would need to restructure its entire approach to information security, review its personnel policies, and rebuild trust between alliance partners who had discovered that their most sensitive secrets had been stolen by foreign intelligence services. The simultaneous arrest of the 4 Chinese intelligence assets required the most complex counterintelligence operation in NATO's history. Ghost coordinated with security services from 4 different countries, planned evidence collection procedures that would stand up in multiple legal systems, and developed damage control strategies that would minimize the political fallout from exposing such a comprehensive intelligence compromise. The operation began at 5:45 hours on a Thursday morning, with NATO security forces moving against all 4 targets simultaneously. Chen was arrested at his home in Norfolk. Park was taken into custody at NATO headquarters in Brussels. Dubois was apprehended at a French naval facility in Toulon, and Virtanen was arrested at her apartment in Helsinki. Each arrest yielded significant intelligence materials. Encrypted communication devices, photographed classified documents, financial records showing payments from Chinese intelligence, and detailed instructions for conducting long-term espionage operations against NATO targets. But the most significant discovery was documentation of additional Chinese intelligence operations that hadn't been detected yet. The interrogations revealed that the 4 arrested operatives were part of a larger Chinese intelligence effort that included assets in defense contractors, academic institutions, and government agencies throughout NATO member countries. The scope of the Chinese intelligence operation was unprecedented, a systematic effort to penetrate every aspect of the Western military and intelligence establishment. Dr. Chen's interrogation was particularly revealing. As the primary intelligence collector, he had detailed knowledge of Chinese intelligence requirements, operational procedures, and strategic objectives. His debriefing revealed that Chinese intelligence was not simply collecting tactical military information. They were building a comprehensive understanding of NATO's decision-making processes, strategic planning capabilities, and alliance relationships. They wanted to know everything, Chen told his interrogators during a session that Ghost observed from behind one-way glass. Military capabilities, diplomatic strategies, intelligence sources, political relationships. They were building a complete picture of how NATO functions, not just what NATO can do. The intelligence Chen had provided to Chinese services included strategic military plans, diplomatic negotiating positions, intelligence assessments of Chinese military capabilities, and detailed analyses of NATO's response options to various international crises. The information would allow Chinese leadership to anticipate NATO responses to future international situations and develop countermeasures that would neutralize alliance advantages. Lieutenant Colonel Park's case revealed Chinese interest in NATO's long-term strategic planning, particularly alliance responses to potential conflicts in the Pacific region. The intelligence Park had provided included detailed assessments of NATO member countries' willingness to support American military operations against China, strategic deployment plans for alliance forces, and analyses of NATO's military capabilities in Pacific scenarios. Captain Dubois had focused on providing real-time intelligence about NATO military operations, including troop movements, intelligence assessments, and operational planning for alliance activities in various global locations. His intelligence had allowed Chinese services to track NATO military activities and provide warning to Chinese partners who might be affected by alliance operations. Major Vertonen's contribution had been the most technically sophisticated. She had provided Chinese intelligence with detailed information about NATO's cybersecurity capabilities, defensive measures, and vulnerabilities in alliance information systems. Her intelligence had enabled Chinese cyber operations against NATO networks and provided guidance for future cyber attacks against alliance infrastructure. The damage assessment from the Chinese intelligence operation revealed security compromises that would affect NATO operations for years to come. Ghost found herself leading a team of analysts who were tasked with determining which classified information had been compromised, which operations needed to be restructured, and which intelligence sources required protection from Chinese retaliation. The assessment was overwhelming in scope. Over 47 major NATO operations had been compromised, intelligence from 12 different member countries had been exposed, and strategic plans covering every potential global conflict scenario had been provided to Chinese intelligence services. NATO would need to develop entirely new operational approaches, replace compromised intelligence sources, and rebuild information security systems from the ground up. But the Chinese operation had also provided unprecedented insights into foreign intelligence targeting of Western military organizations. Ghost's investigation had revealed recruitment techniques, operational procedures, and strategic objectives that would help NATO develop better defenses against future intelligence threats. The political ramifications were equally significant. The exposure of such comprehensive Chinese intelligence penetration would strain relationships between NATO and China, provide evidence of Chinese intelligence operations that violated international law, and demonstrate the need for enhanced counterintelligence cooperation between alliance partners. Ghost's role in exposing both the Russian and Chinese intelligence operations had established her as one of the most effective counterintelligence operatives in the Western intelligence community. Her techniques for identifying foreign intelligence assets, her ability to build comprehensive cases against professional operatives, and her success in neutralizing threats to NATO security had attracted attention at the highest levels of American and Allied intelligence services. Deputy Director Harrison contacted Ghost directly to discuss her next assignment. "Captain Reeves, your work in Europe has been extraordinary. The President has been personally briefed on your operations, and there's discussion of promoting you to the Senior Intelligence Service. But first, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention." The situation was developing in the Indo-Pacific region, where Chinese intelligence was suspected of recruiting assets within the military establishments of American allies. Ghost's mission would be to identify and neutralize Chinese intelligence operations in Australia, Japan, and South Korea, countries that were critical to American strategic planning in the Pacific. "How long do I have to prepare?" Ghost asked, already anticipating the complexity of operating in a region where Chinese intelligence services had significant advantages in terms of cultural understanding, language capabilities, and regional knowledge. "Your flight to Sydney leaves tomorrow night," Harrison replied. "The Chinese are moving aggressively to compromise our Pacific alliances, and we need someone with your proven ability to hunt down foreign intelligence assets. This could be the most important counterintelligence operation of your career." Ghost looked out the window of her temporary office at NATO headquarters, watching alliance personnel from dozens of countries working together to defend shared values against common threats. The intelligence war was moving to the Pacific, but the stakes were higher than ever: the security of democratic alliances in an increasingly dangerous world. The flight to Sydney took Ghost across 3 continents and through multiple time zones, giving her 27 hours to study the intelligence briefings that would define her next mission. The Chinese intelligence operation in the Indo-Pacific was more complex than anything she'd encountered in Afghanistan or Europe, involving multiple countries, sophisticated recruitment networks, and strategic objectives that threatened American interests throughout the region. Chinese intelligence was systematically targeting military personnel from American allies, using recruitment techniques that had been refined through decades of operations against Western targets. The approach was patient, professional, and designed to build long-term intelligence relationships that could provide Beijing with strategic warning about American military planning in the Pacific. Ghost's cover identity for the Pacific operation was comprehensive: Major Lisa Zhang, U.S. Army Intelligence, assigned to the Pacific Partnership Program as a liaison officer working on intelligence sharing between American and Allied forces. The identity would give her access to military installations throughout the region, while providing legitimate reasons for her to interact with personnel who might be targeted by Chinese intelligence. Her first assignment was in Australia, where Chinese intelligence was suspected of recruiting assets within the Australian Defence Force. The recruitment operation appeared to be targeting personnel with access to information about American military activities in the region, joint training exercises, and strategic planning for potential conflicts in the South China Sea. Ghost arrived in Sydney on a Tuesday morning and reported to the American consulate, where she received additional briefings from CIA station personnel and Australian intelligence officers. The joint nature of the operation reflected the strategic importance of identifying and neutralizing Chinese intelligence threats to the U.S.-Australia alliance. "The Chinese have been very aggressive in their recruitment efforts," explained Sarah Matthews, the CIA station chief in Sydney. "We've identified at least 12 separate approaches to Australian military personnel in the past 18 months, using everything from financial incentives to romantic relationships to academic conferences. The pattern was familiar to Ghost from her previous operations. Chinese intelligence was using multiple recruitment vectors simultaneously, increasing their chances of success while making it difficult for counterintelligence services to identify and neutralize the entire network. Ghost's investigation began at the Royal Australian Air Force Base at Richmond, where intelligence analysts processed information about American military activities in the Pacific. The facility employed over 300 personnel, including Australian military officers, civilian contractors, and American liaison personnel who coordinated intelligence sharing between the two allies. Her initial assessment identified 15 individuals who had access to the type of information that Chinese intelligence would prioritize: strategic planning documents, intelligence assessments of Chinese military capabilities, and operational details about joint U.S.-Australian military exercises. Each of these individuals became a potential suspect in Ghost's investigation. The challenge was identifying which, if any, of these individuals had been successfully recruited by Chinese intelligence. Unlike the NATO operations she'd conducted in Europe, Ghost couldn't rely on comprehensive surveillance of suspected assets. The geographic distances involved were too great, the legal restrictions were more complex, and the cultural differences required more subtle investigative approaches. Ghost's breakthrough in Australia came from an unexpected source: social media analysis of personnel assigned to the Richmond facility. Chinese intelligence had been using social networking platforms to identify and assess potential recruitment targets, building comprehensive profiles of Australian military personnel through their online activities and personal relationships. The analysis revealed that Flight Lieutenant David Walsh, Royal Australian Air Force, had been systematically targeted through professional networking sites, academic conferences, and social media platforms. Walsh worked in intelligence analysis, had access to classified information about U.S.-Australian military cooperation, and displayed online behavior that suggested possible foreign intelligence contact. Walsh's social media accounts showed connections to individuals who appeared to be Chinese nationals living in Australia, but deeper investigation revealed that several of these contacts were using false identities that corresponded to known Chinese intelligence operatives. The pattern suggested a sophisticated targeting operation that had been running for at least 8 months. Ghost established surveillance on Walsh using techniques adapted for the Australian operating environment. She monitored his communications using legal interception authorities provided by Australian intelligence services, tracked his movements through electronic surveillance methods, and built a comprehensive profile of his activities both on and off the military installation. The surveillance revealed that Walsh was meeting regularly with Dr. James Liu, a Chinese-Australian academic who claimed to be conducting research on Pacific security issues. Liu's background appeared legitimate. He held a doctorate in international relations from a prestigious Australian university and had published extensively on regional security topics. But Ghost's investigation revealed that Liu's academic credentials masked a sophisticated intelligence operation. His research projects were funded by organizations with connections to Chinese intelligence services. His publications contained detailed analyses of Australian military capabilities that served Chinese strategic interests, and his academic meetings with military personnel followed classic intelligence collection protocols. Walsh's meetings with Liu took place at restaurants, coffee shops, and academic conferences throughout Sydney, using the kind of cover for status that provided plausible deniability while enabling systematic intelligence collection. Ghost documented 12 separate meetings over a 4-month period, each one involving the transfer of information from Walsh to Liu. The intelligence Walsh was providing included strategic assessments of American military capabilities in the Pacific, operational details about joint U.S.-Australian military exercises, and classified analyses of Chinese military activities in the South China Sea. The information would allow Chinese strategic planners to develop comprehensive countermeasures against American and allied military operations in the region. But Walsh was not operating alone. Ghost's investigation revealed that Liu was simultaneously handling 3 other Australian military personnel, creating a small but effective intelligence network that provided Chinese services with comprehensive access to Australian defence information. Squadron Leader Jennifer Park, Royal Australian Air Force, worked in strategic planning and had access to long-term Australian defence strategies. Major Robert Thompson, Australian Army, served in intelligence fusion and could provide tactical military intelligence. Commander Lisa Chen, Royal Australian Navy, was assigned to maritime operations planning and had access to information about naval activities throughout the Pacific. Each operative was being handled using different techniques, but all 4 were providing intelligence that gave Chinese services unprecedented insight into Australian military capabilities and strategic intentions. Ghost realized she was looking at a professional intelligence operation that threatened the fundamental security of the U.S.-Australian alliance. The decision to expand the investigation to include all 4 Chinese assets required coordination between American and Australian intelligence services at the highest levels. Ghost found herself briefing a joint task force that included representatives from the CIA, FBI, Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, and Australian Defence Intelligence Organisation. The Chinese operation represents a systematic penetration of the Australian Defence Force that threatens intelligence sharing between our countries, Ghost explained to the Joint Task Force. The 4 assets have provided Chinese intelligence with comprehensive information about American military activities in the Pacific, Australian defence capabilities, and joint strategic planning between our forces. The damage assessment was sobering. Chinese intelligence had gained access to strategic military plans, intelligence sources, operational procedures, and alliance relationships that would affect American and Australian operations throughout the Pacific region. The intelligence compromise had strategic implications that extended far beyond the immediate security concerns. But the Joint Task Force also recognized that the investigation had provided unprecedented insights into Chinese intelligence operations in the Pacific. Ghost's work had revealed recruitment techniques, operational procedures, and strategic objectives that would help American and allied forces develop better defenses against future Chinese intelligence threats. The takedown operation was planned for maximum impact. Simultaneous arrests that would neutralize the Chinese network while collecting intelligence materials that could reveal additional Chinese operations throughout the region. Ghost coordinated with Australian law enforcement and intelligence services to ensure that the arrests would be conducted according to Australian legal procedures while preserving evidence for potential prosecution. At 6:30 hours on a Wednesday morning, Australian Federal Police and military security forces moved against all 4 targets simultaneously. Walsh was arrested at his home in Sydney. Park was taken into custody at the Richmond facility. Thompson was apprehended at his apartment in Melbourne, and Chen was arrested aboard her ship at the Garden Island Naval Facility. The arrests yielded significant intelligence materials similar to those Ghost had recovered in previous operations. Encrypted communication devices, photographed classified documents, financial records showing payments from Chinese sources, and operational instructions for conducting long-term espionage activities against Australian and American targets. Dr. Liu was arrested at his university office, where Australian security forces recovered sophisticated communication equipment, detailed files on multiple Australian military personnel, and documentation of Chinese intelligence requirements for Pacific operations. Liu's arrest revealed the academic cover that Chinese intelligence was using to conduct recruitment operations throughout the region. The interrogations provided insights into Chinese intelligence strategy in the Pacific that complemented Ghost's previous investigations in Europe. The Chinese were conducting systematic intelligence operations against American allies, using sophisticated recruitment techniques and professional handling procedures to build networks that could provide strategic warning about American military activities. Flight Lieutenant Walsh's debriefing revealed Chinese interest in American military planning for potential conflicts in the South China Sea, strategic deployment options for American forces in the Pacific, and alliance relationships between the United States and regional partners. The intelligence Walsh had provided would allow Chinese strategic planners to anticipate American responses to various Pacific scenarios. Squadron Leader Park had focused on providing long-term strategic intelligence about Australian defense planning, military capabilities, and alliance relationships with the United States. Her intelligence had given Chinese services detailed understanding of Australian strategic intentions and military limitations in Pacific operations. The success of the Australian operation led to Ghost's deployment to Japan, where Chinese intelligence was suspected of conducting even more sophisticated recruitment operations against the Japan self-defense forces. The Japanese operation presented unique challenges: cultural differences, language barriers, and legal restrictions that required Ghost to adapt her investigative techniques for a completely different operating environment. Ghost's cover identity in Japan was carefully crafted to provide access to Japanese military installations, while respecting the cultural sensitivities that governed American-Japanese intelligence cooperation. She became Major Jennifer Tanaka, U.S. Army Intelligence, assigned to the bilateral intelligence sharing program that coordinated information exchange between American and Japanese forces. The Chinese intelligence operation in Japan was more complex than anything Ghost had encountered in her previous assignments. Chinese services were using multiple recruitment vectors simultaneously: financial incentives, romantic relationships, academic exchanges, business partnerships, and cultural organizations that provided cover for intelligence activities. Ghost's investigation began at the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force Intelligence Facility in Tokyo, where analysts processed information about Chinese military activities and American military planning in the Pacific. The facility employed over 400 personnel, including Japanese military officers, civilian contractors, and American liaison personnel. Initial analysis identified 23 individuals who had access to information that would be valuable to Chinese intelligence. Strategic assessments of Chinese military capabilities, operational plans for joint U.S.-Japanese military exercises, and intelligence reports on North Korean activities that affected regional security planning. The challenge was identifying which of these individuals might have been successfully recruited by Chinese intelligence. Ghost's investigation required careful coordination with Japanese counterintelligence services, who provided cultural insights and language capabilities that were essential for understanding the Chinese recruitment operations. The breakthrough came from analyzing financial transactions associated with personnel at the Tokyo facility. Colonel Hiroshi Nakamura, Japan Ground Self-Defense Force, had received several large cash deposits over the past year that exceeded his military salary and appeared to have no legitimate source. Nakamura worked in strategic intelligence analysis, had access to classified assessments of Chinese military capabilities, and displayed behavior patterns that suggested possible foreign intelligence contact. His financial irregularities provided the initial lead that allowed Ghost to focus her investigation on a specific target. Surveillance of Nakamura revealed meetings with individuals who appeared to be Chinese nationals living in Japan, but further investigation showed that several of these contacts were using false identities associated with Chinese intelligence operations. The meetings took place at cultural centers, business conferences, and social events that provided cover for intelligence collection activities. Ghost's investigation revealed that Nakamura was being handled by a sophisticated Chinese intelligence network that included multiple operatives using different cover identities. The network was more complex than the operations she'd uncovered in Australia, involving business relationships, cultural exchanges, and academic partnerships that provided multiple avenues for intelligence collection. The Chinese operation in Japan included assets in the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force, Japan Air Self-Defense Force, and civilian organizations that supported Japanese defense activities. Ghost realized she was looking at a comprehensive intelligence penetration that threatened the security of the U.S.-Japanese alliance and American strategic planning throughout the Pacific region. The Japanese investigation required Ghost to work closely with the Public Security Intelligence Agency, Japan's primary counterintelligence organization. The collaboration provided insights into Chinese intelligence operations that complemented her previous work while revealing the scope of Chinese activities throughout the Pacific region. Colonel Nakamura was the primary asset in a network that included 6 other Japanese personnel with access to classified information about American military activities and Japanese defense capabilities. Each asset was being handled using different techniques, but all were providing intelligence that gave Chinese services comprehensive understanding of U.S.-Japanese military cooperation. Major Yuki Sato, Japan Air Self-Defense Force, worked in intelligence analysis and had access to assessments of Chinese air capabilities and American strategic planning for potential Pacific conflicts. Commander Kenji Watanabe, Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force, served in naval operations planning and could provide intelligence about American naval activities and Japanese maritime defense strategies. Captain Akiko Suzuki, Japan Ground Self-Defense Force, was assigned to joint planning with American forces and had access to operational details about bilateral military exercises and strategic cooperation between the two allies. Dr. Takeshi Yamamoto, a civilian contractor working on intelligence analysis, provided technical assessments of Chinese military capabilities and American